Hey guys, Kid Aikino here. It's been a minute since the last one of these, hasn't it? It might be a little while yet before the next one too, considering that Godzilla vs. Kong has now officially been pushed back again to next May. But hey, at least now it'll be able to carry on the grand G-Fest tradition of screening movies that we all just saw in theaters a couple months ago. That is, if there are still theaters in business by then. But enough about that. Last time we left off with the 1976 King Kong remake, and a low-budget film riding its coattails that actually beat it into theaters. First up this time, we have a similar production from Hong Kong's Shaw Brothers studio, the Mighty Peking Man. This one kinda has a reputation as a wacky, so-bad-it's-good movie, and it's kinda hard to argue with that. It kind of feels as if it was written with the attention span of a child in mind. It wastes absolutely no time getting into the plot, with an expedition of explorers searching for the titular creature, and having to contend with stampeding elephants, tigers, quicksand, and dangerous cliffs all in rapid succession, with only one breather to set up Johnny Chen Zhengfeng's backstory, which is only relevant for like 5 minutes in the entire rest of the film. The rest of the expedition ditches him, and the Peking Man immediately shows up. Then there's the thinnest possible love story with an orphan girl raised in the jungle by the Peking Man, and then of course they all go to Hong Kong. The Peking Man is put on display and escapes captivity to save the girl from a rapacious promoter. It's a Kong knockoff, you know the drill. This film had the kind of financial backing that Ape didn't, and aims to entertain in the most straightforward, unsophisticated way possible. I don't know how representative it is of Shaw Brothers' output in general, but if they were often this successful on that level, I can understand why they were so popular. It's a delirious mix of action, adventure, special effects, and sex appeal, the effect of which is only heightened by the tight, sometimes jarring editing and relentless pacing. A lot of Toho staff worked on the effects, with suitmaker Keizo Murase actually wearing the Peking Man costume at the climax and falling in flames off the miniature Connaught Center. You absolutely owe it to yourself to check this one out at least once. By 1980, Daiei had been revived by an investment from publishing magnate Yasuyoshi Tokuma, and one of the projects greenlit was Gamera Super Monster, a new film by longtime series director Noriaki Yuasa. Unfortunately though, Yuasa was given basically no money to work with and was told to build his film around footage from the previous Gamera films, like All Monsters Attack, but even more constrained. The result isn't anything I can call good, but I find it charming. It's just so weird and unique. The story revolves around a kid who hangs around with a trio of spacewomen who live in a van that turns into a spaceship and are pursued by the most incompetent alien supervillain imaginable. The kid is forced to release his pet turtle early on and believes that it grows into Gamera, which would be easy enough to write off, except that it's never quite clear whether all the monster stuff is just in his head. There's also just a lot of pop culture references, with the invading alien spaceship Xanon showing clear influence from Star Wars, the kids reading Shonen Jump, a jab at Godzilla, and the incorporation of stock footage from popular anime like Galaxy Express 39 and Space Battleship Yamato. Gamera even rips off the Yamato's suicide attack at the end of the film, apparently because Yuasa didn't want any more Gamera films to be made if this was how they were going to be done. I can't say I blame him, but I am glad that Super Monster was made, as flawed as it is. Next up, we have Toho's response to increasing fan demand in the early 80s, the Return of Godzilla. This film clearly had two major goals, one being to return Godzilla to his roots as a menacing figure tied to nuclear weapons, and the other being to return the series to the sort of blockbuster ambition of Toho's first decade or so of tokusatsu films after the original Godzilla. It's more successful, I think, in accomplishing that first goal. It makes the case that the escalating hostilities at the time between the US and the Soviet Union threaten the rest of the world, and above all emphasizes that nuclear war must be avoided at all costs. The Prime Minister is played excellently by Keiju Kobayashi as kind of an embodiment of this Japanese perspective on the Cold War, as he's called upon to face the threat of Godzilla while mediating conflicts not only between the superpowers, but between various factions within the Japanese government. This film falters in achieving its second goal, While the production value is obviously a huge step up over the Godzilla films of the 1970s, the Return of Godzilla fumbles some of its more ambitious elements. Take the special effects. There's some great miniature work in this film, and the new Godzilla suit looks excellent, but like the King Kong remake before it, this film tries to top itself with a large animatronic that doesn't look much like the suit and doesn't move very convincingly. The life-size Godzilla foot is also an interesting idea, but look at it, the execution is terrible. There are also things like the poorly edited fight between Maki and the giant sea louse, and the way Godzilla seems to just wander aimlessly around Tokyo after a while, becoming less aggressive and threatening as his rampage goes on. I applaud this film for attempting what it does, and I love the somber mood director Koji Hashimoto and composer Reijiro Koroku bring to it, but given the issues with its execution, I'm not surprised Toho looked to new talent for the eventual sequel. The Return of Godzilla did have its admirers though, notably including Kim Jong-il, who had long held a keen interest in cinema from around the world and advocated for the production of North Korean films of similar quality, expressing the Jusha idea. The year after The Return of Godzilla was released in Japan, Pulgasari, based on a Korean legend about an iron-eating monster, opened in North Korea. This is one of the most notorious and, in my opinion, least understood kaiju films ever made, and I really want to make a video focusing on it sometime, so I'm gonna keep my comments on it here brief. What I will say is this: it's a common observation about early Soviet films like Battleship Potemkin and Strike that they treat the masses collectively as protagonists as opposed to anyone individually. And while there are prominent individual characters in Pulgasari, none of them carry the story forward alone. It reminds me of the quasi-ensemble casts you see a lot in Japanese kaiju films, but taken a step further. The special effects were overseen by Teruyoshi Nakano, who directed the effects for The Return of Godzilla, and while these effects aren't as polished, they are nonetheless very striking. Even in a vacuum, Pulgasari is a unique and interesting film and well worth checking out. I'll go into more depth in the future, but for now I'll leave you with this. The monster Pulgasari is a metaphor for capitalism, full stop, and it speaks to Westerners' profound unfamiliarity with socialist theory that more people don't grasp this. And finally, we come to the US version of Godzilla's comeback film, Godzilla 1985. This is, of course, the film in which Raymond Burr reprises his role as Steve Martin from the original Godzilla King of the Monsters. It's an interesting comparison to the Japanese cut in many respects. Aside from adding scenes with Burr at the Pentagon advising US military brass on the situation unfolding in Japan, it also extensively recuts The Return of Godzilla into a very lean, straightforward thriller. All told, it runs about 15 minutes shorter, with a brisk pace that admittedly comes at the expense of a lot of nuance. A lot of the Prime Minister's characterization is lost, as is Maki's falling out and gradual reconciliation with Naoko. This leaves the characters even thinner than they already were. There's also the distributor's political agenda. New World Pictures' conservative leadership changed how the Cold War elements were presented. In the original version, Japan is diplomatic about revealing that Godzilla and not the US sank the Soviet submarine, and emphasized that armed conflict has been avoided. On the other hand, in the dub...
That's right, ladies and gentlemen of the press, Godzilla. Contrary to Soviet suspicion that the Americans were involved in the destruction of the Soviet sub, we have definitive proof that this tragedy was caused by Godzilla.
And that's to say nothing of mistranslating the Russian dialogue to make the satellite missile launch deliberate, and omitting a shot of an American missile satellite in favor of hand-wringing about the legality of the Soviet satellite.
But that violates the UN Space Treaty.
Also notice how in this version the Soviets are the only characters not speaking English, adding another layer of distance between them and the audience. I do really like this version though. The dubbing is pretty good. The lip flaps aren't perfectly meticulously matched, but I really like the voice acting itself. Raymond Burr apparently knocked out all his scenes in 8 hours, but he turns in a dead serious performance and adds a real gravitas to the whole thing, including his great eulogy for Godzilla at the end. There are a number of individual scenes in this version that are recut in ways that just work a lot better. The sea louse fight is less of a mess, some crowd shots in the supposedly evacuated Tokyo are moved to earlier scenes, and scenes where Godzilla once seemed slow and aimless are cleverly tightened and augmented with shots from elsewhere in the film to make Godzilla more aggressive, bearing down on the protagonists until the very last second. The added stock music cues by Christopher Young liven up a number of scenes and mesh with the original score a lot better than similar additions to other Toho tokusatsu films. I wouldn't quite call this version better, but the changes it makes by and large really work. Godzilla 1985, I raise my Dr. Pepper to you. Next time we'll take a look at the extremely belated sequel to the '76 King Kong remake, plus Godzilla vs. Biollante, King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Mechagodzilla. Until then, thanks to my patrons, especially Exploder Button, John Panier, and Ryan Clark. You can become a patron at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.